my name is Carlos Medellin. I'm from Bogota, Colombia. I'm an architect, but I will say I've been trying to focus more in something I call spatial design, which means a little perspective within the architecture field that is not so focused only on the buildings, but in the relationships that those buildings foster. So basically, I do like to think on spatial relationships and social relationships through design.
So, Carlos, is it possible to make racial and environmental justice fundamental to the education of an architect? And if so, how do you and we go about doing that?
This is not a matter of being possible or not. I think it's a matter of how it should be. Like, to me, the built space has so much influence in the way we relate. It's actually the interface on how relationships happen, that if we are not really focused on that, we're not only missing the opportunity of actually improving the ways in which we can live together as society, as individuals, as different communities and so on. It also means avoiding an ethical responsibility that we as designers have, you know? After COVID, but way before. I mean, having lived in a country that has had one of the longest armed conflicts in the world and is one of the most unequal ones, it's not longer a matter of if we could. Mm-hmm. I mean, it should be like that. I guess it's a matter of intention, also a matter of changing priorities. So far, in my perspective and in my personal journey, I have seen how, as architects, we have been focused too much on producing objects, mm-hmm. and usually objects that are at the service of either or both ourselves as designers, mm-hmm. or somebody's agenda. Mm-hmm. And take it from public to commercial architecture. I've seen how you can design something just for a mayor to take a picture and appear, mm-hmm. in a newspaper, or for a company to make more money, mm-hmm. without actually noticing how there's clear influences there in the process of breaking the relationships that people have. Mm-hmm. There needs to be a shift. And I'm not saying that the architectural object is not important. What I'm saying is that I do care more about the relationships. Mm-hmm. And I do care more about understanding those histories, mm-hmm. and also those stories that happen in architecture. And there comes one of my favorite words, which is to be able to restore what has been, mm-hmm. broken, to actually being able to think on future scenarios that could be more equal or more just in, mm-hmm. a way.
Can we confront abstraction, right? So I think one of the tendencies, or when we look at the history of architectural education, at least in the beginning, there is an inclination to push content aside and deal with the perfect abstract cube, or something that exercises the students' design muscles in the absence of content. And I'm hearing you saying it's impossible to have an apolitical, non-social building. What can that look like in the hands of a very beginning student who doesn't know where to start? And I'm not necessarily trying to say abstraction is always the enemy. Like, maybe that's something we'll talk about.
I remember one friend telling me once, you architects like to be like housekeepers. You like to clean everything. Yeah. Everything needs to be clean.
Yes.
And you know, actually today I was talking with somebody and told me, like an architect, can we just get these two lines closer? It's gonna look cleaner. And that's the argument.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we should start like showing to the students is that architecture is messy. Yeah. And actually it comes from mess. We produce mess. Have you seen like a construction, mm-hmm. like a building site? Mm-hmm. That's a mess. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting too, because within that mess you can find not only creative paths to produce something, mm-hmm. different, but also the reality. The reality, mm-hmm. is messy. Mm-hmm. And to me, what architecture has done in the terms that you say, like focusing only on the abstraction, is just avoiding the mess and trying to not face it. Why? Because it's complicated. It is. It is complicated. And I know that already designing and building architecture is difficult. It's a bunch of things to get. I mean, it's already like difficult.
Yeah.
But that's why also I think the idea of building architecture together instead of one person being in charge of that is super important right now. Because yes, it is messy, it is complicated, but also is totally capable of being done by people if we are interested and we all just like put our hands on that, you know? So I guess that's why to me it's super important working in teams. And actually, to be more romantic, the friendship that you build within that production of space.
Yeah. I mean, the friendship's an interesting metaphor for messiness too, right? Like
It is.
that's often the test of like whether a friendship holds is like when things get messy or complicated, it doesn't disrupt the friendship.
There's a quote of Aristotle that the men become friends whenever they have eaten salt together. And it's really pretty because eating salt could sound very simple, but it's very complex, you know? Like, what's the amount of salt that you can put in a plate? Is it too salty? Is it less? It requires negotiation. It requires agreement.
Yeah.
It requires a bunch of things that also, like, for example, in Spanish, when you say that, like eating salt together, it usually goes to a place whenever you have had a struggle, or a fight, or a problem. So that quote to me is very interesting because when you relate it to architecture, when am I eating salt with the people we are designing for, or when can we just sit together to eat something with everybody involved in the project? And that to me is what's important. Actually, for a while, I was really angry with the word architecture. Because I thought that it took power over the idea of space, while actually eating salt, eating bread together, that's space. That's immediately space. You don't need a fancy building. You don't need like a bunch of thousands of tons of concrete to do that. So actually, one of the things that I'm working on is in rethinking this idea of architecture from the building and start thinking, architecture is also an event. It's just the moment. It's just time and space.
So just to stay on politics, justice, equity, and the environment. So let's say I'm a student. I can't read the newspaper, look out at the city without feeling and understanding the issues of our times, right? So we accept that our world is charged. In the educational setting, do you, and I'm going to give you an either or, but I think it's probably a little bit of both, or should a curriculum help students find architectural or spatial interventions, or are you inclined to reflect on the political implications of the spaces that we inhabit, right? So like things we take for granted, like a door and a wall, barriers, ownership, capitalism, the things that exist, do we like study and interrogate them, or do we go in search of new disciplinary modes, new fundamental premises for architecture?
I think it's both, for sure. I think you really need to understand the traces of what you're working with. Otherwise, there's no way to be conscious about the decisions and the political decisions or the social decisions that you are making or you are constructing together with people. But having said that, I also think that we need to put in consideration that the answer for problems should be a building. Like that to me is key. And why? There's many moments in which as architects, for getting the job or for whatever reason, we agree to do things or buildings that at the end are going to be more problematic for the people that are in a place or something. If we learn to say no, it would be just great. Like, no, I'm not doing this. why am I doing this here? Instead of, now I'm imagining this here.
Right. Yeah.
In those terms, I think we do need to learn an ethical way of saying no.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
learning to say no.
Yeah. On the subject of saying no, or the skill of saying no, or the creative agency of saying no, the power of saying no, do you agree that often we as professors of architecture take too much agency in framing the problem for students, and we ask them how as opposed to give them the scenario? Right? Like, I'm just imagining situations where a student might find it difficult to say no without rebelling against the prompt or the course. Like, is there a different way of looking at it? Like, can we put that on us as professors a little bit more to provide the mess as opposed to providing 90% of the answer and asking students to fill in the 10% that's left?
I do think what you're saying is something I'm really thinking about right now, because even when you think about the studios, the way we frame the reviews and the studios are always static in a way. No, what's a review? And a review, a bunch of people that have knowledge, it's fine, come, and they just kind of review you. Okay, and that happens everywhere. Okay, it's fine. What's the creative process there? Like in that conversation, how can that change? And in the project, it's the same. Like at the end, we ask the students to provide plan sections, axonometries, models. Of course, there's already something that you as a teacher also have in your mind. And to be honest, many of the times that we design a course and we provide the space for reviews, actually we're also thinking on our own name, no? What are the other reviewers are going to say about my work? So I do think that we need to step out of that, really think how these reviews or these ways of having conversation about projects need to change. And also stop thinking that we are evaluated by the rest because of the students' work. Like, it's their work. Like, that's what's important,
Yeah, we need some distance.
We need to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know who do we need to learn from, because design doesn't work that different. Maybe from art we can learn some things. I don't know, but there needs to be something that, as faculty or as thinkers on whatever you want to call it, space architecture, we do need to provide different spaces and tools for the students to find their own path.
Yeah.
That to me is key.
You are joining a cohort of new faculty that are yourselves diverse, pluralistic in your thinking, have inherently interdisciplinary practices. How do you plan, or how are you interested in positioning yourself part of a college-wide community of disciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary thinkers and practitioners?
My last job, like actual job, I was directing a foundation that was born out of being worried on how the money that was going to come to Colombia for post-conflict, after the peace deal agreement was signed, was going to be spent. Like, this is going to be spent in infrastructure. How do we manage to actually make sure that the money is going to be spent in the right way? No? And when I say in the right way, it's at least not only to point to indicators and just become numbers and numbers.
Sure.
So politicians can just show, like, we construct how many new buildings or whatever. And during that process of building the foundation and running it and doing projects, I understood that if I wanted to focus on social architecture, and that's huge to define. Let's say I'm just using it as a term that could actually tell you that I'm focused on architecture that has a social impact. Anyways, all architecture has social and political impact, but let's just frame it in that way. Architecture was not enough. Not enough to be able to foster and push social justice or equity or whatever. It's not enough. It needs to be aligned with the service that is going to be provided. It needs to be aligned with the products or objects that people are going to use there. It needs to be aligned totally with the way that any kind of public program or policy is going to be told and communicated. And most of all, it needs to be an architecture that actually opens space for anybody's stories. I've been working a lot on justice, like trying to understand the connection between architecture and justice, and mostly with restorative justice. I came to understand that justice is a storytelling process, no? It depends on who decides what's just, who decides who can tell the story, who decides what story needs to be told. And to me, architecture happens a little bit the same, no? So all this to tell you that in this point of my life, I'm very interested on shifting from defining a story to listen to stories and to be able to produce spaces that allow others to tell their own story or collect those stories. So empathy and knowledge can be spread in a different way. That requires different media. That requires different expertises. Like the way in which you tell stories that come deep from you, it's not the same way in which I could, no?
Yeah. Maybe this relates to your work in Bogota, the nonprofit. How much is your role, your collaborators' role, teaching non-architects about space? Like, is that a major component of it? And maybe it's not overt, like in a way what you just described is a little bit of that. It gives kind of agency to affect tools and media, and so therefore automatically one is processing and reflecting on tools and media.
Yeah, I think I will say it's about teaching at all, because that's something also that I never understood. Like, then you ask people about the city or about a building, and they're like, "Oh, but you're the architect. Tell me."
Yeah.
And it's like, what? What, like, what do you want me to tell you? Like, when is this from? Like, the important thing is what happens there. How do you use it? That's the key point. Everybody knows that. I guess our skills are more make that evidence and also providing maybe options or ideas to do something with that space that will serve to what people are requiring, agreeing, or needing.
Yeah.
No? So it's a big process of understanding together how space could be used, but at the same time is reflecting of others trying to explain us or to make evident how the politics of the law of the space could work, or how the weight of the gender inequity in the space work, or even how, I don't know, the light comes. I don't know, like whatever. It's just a matter of keep talking and having conversations about how can we use this and how can we live together, basically.
Yeah. Tell me about your writing and research on spaces that learn.
How that started? I was in the Chicago Biennial, and a dear friend of mine was living in Chicago doing her PhD on philosophy. And we were walking in one of the rooms of the exhibit, and then she was just laughing. I was like, why are you laughing? And she was looking at some models, and it was like, because it says the Platonic geometries. And I was like, why are you laughing? Like, it sounds smart. And she was like, because they're Platonic. You cannot construct them. Just by common sense, is Platonic.
Yeah.
So we started a conversation
the kind of thing that really gets a philosopher laughing.
But it's true. It's actually true. And she was like, why architects write so much bullshit? Like, like that can be, I mean, she was just like, but she was laughing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I agree with you. Yeah. And then we were thinking on how, what actually happens, and I think I've said this in other moments, with focusing on the object is that you really don't focus on the relationships. And then we started talking about how there's this feminist writer, Sarah Ahmed, that talks about the orientation of objects. And we were talking about the orientation of spaces. And then suddenly it was super clear, like, oh, if we stop thinking about this as an object, but more about those orientations and more about how this space is a subject in itself, you could actually acknowledge all the historical changes or the dynamics, everything that happens, instead of being focusing only on the form and how it is built. That's how Spaces That Learn came, because then we started saying, oh, but then the space learned from us. For sure. And that's how we started thinking about this idea of thinking on spaces as subjects. And that, in another level, is also thinking on the subjectivities of it, no? Like, space is charged of politics, space is charged of social dynamics. Spaces have orientation, like bathrooms, they have orientation. And now I'm talking about orientation as like sexual orientation, like orientation in a big way, as Sarah Ahmed does. So we got the opportunity to write an article, and we started thinking, she's from Bogota too. What should we write the article about? And in that moment, we were just like really into drag queens and looking a lot to how a space, when a drag queen comes, immediately changes. Just by the presence, just by the outfit, just by the energy of it. So I grew up in Bogota. There's this very classic neighborhood in Bogota called Chapinero. My grandmother used to live in Chapinero, and I used just to walk the streets of Chapinero with her, looking for objects to buy, like for Christmas gift or for the groceries, whatever. But at night, they would always advise me not to go there. I was wondering always, like, why? And then when I grew up and I came out as a gay man, I understood that one of the things that they didn't want me in contact with was with the gay part of that neighborhood. It's the only gay neighborhood in whole Colombia that was actually, like, in public policy accepted or
But
defined,
only at night.
whatever.
Yeah.
So that neighborhood changed a lot when I started going to parties. Also, Colombia is very segregated. Bogota is very segregated. And there's one place there called Teatron, which is the biggest gay bar, I know, in Latin America, but probably one of the biggest in the world. And the story is fantastic. Like, it used to be a theater that then it went bankrupt, and it became a church that my grandma used to go, actually. And then some people taking advantage of the change of constitution that homosexuality wasn't like a problem or in the 1991 constitution, they started renting the place to do one party each month, then each 2 weeks, then every weekend, and then they just bought the place. And it became so successful that they started buying all the other buildings around. And now it's the whole block with more than 16 spaces inside, 16 spaces with 16 different music. That, I don't know, each weekend before COVID, there must have like 3,000 people. It's really interesting because inside is like a Disneyland. I mean, of course, it has a bunch of social problems like everywhere else.
Sure.
Like if you have like trans people, they get segregated. Like it's not a paradise at all.
Yeah.
But it's a proof to me on how, for example, social classes can come together. That doesn't happen often there. But this became a special place for the city. People would just come and be together there and enjoy 16 different, like, it looks like almost like one of these Shumi or Remcool has like collapsing programs.
Yes.
It's amazing. It was done by just a man.
Yeah.
Like, he was just like traveling the world and saying, oh, I like this plaza in Istanbul. I built the plaza. Oh, I like this bar in Berlin. The Rock Bar in Berlin. And they just collapse. And the diversity that you can see is amazing. And to me, that's a space that learn, actually.
Yeah.
And it just wraps up everything I'm talking about, the orientations and so on. But I guess the most important thing to me is also to understand the consequences that it brought. So it is not only a place where you already know in the city that you will find diversity, for sure. It is also...
Intersectional diversity.
Exactly. It is also a place that, for its presence, pushed the capacity of the neighborhood into becoming the first gay neighborhood in Colombia. You know, like now the protests happen there, Pride happens there. Like people come there just to talk and to be on those topics. So that's why I really like to know the history of things. You know?
I mean, I'm looking forward to you being here, right? And having not just one new voice, but many new voices, like have moments where I thought the terms of disciplinary debate were kind of set and I had my position or my orientation and I knew the terms, and I look forward to having kind of new terms of debate, new marker points that I can respond to, ally with, that is only possible with a cohort of new people and new energy.
I guess one thing I'm expecting to be able to do at RISD is to open space for students to explore their own identities through designing and through being here. I think that's a key point, because how can you actually try to become a listener of stories if you are not able to tell your own and to really understand your own? So I think that's one key important aspect that I will try to push in my teaching here or collaboration here, or whatever we want to call it. And the other thing, in a way, and I don't know if this will make sense, but the idea of being present within the social context that we are in will be key. And how do I mean that? I want to push the students to work in RISD and about RISD. And if that makes sense, I want them to really be exploring being part of the community through design. That's to say, to put our skills as designers and architects at the service of the community we're living in as a starting point of understanding how can we use our skills in our communities and to put them at the service of our communities, because that's what's matters. You know? Like, if you are really interested in a community because of the ties you have or because of the issues they have or whatever, it's gonna make sense for you.